Yeah. All right, so we've come a long way in the past few months. I can go through section 4, the background. Two design workshops have taken place, with a third last week, and that went very well. We also did 2 tours, one of Niagara Regional Police Headquarters and Barrie. So that really helped us understand some of the lessons learned after post-built, and we included those in our subsequent design. The schematic design has been finalized, and we also received a Class C estimate, which brought the budget into a new level of detail. And that Class C estimate is available for review. It's just not here today. Net zero building standard design, that's ongoing. We have mechanical and electrical design considerations that are being analyzed by our sub-consultant in terms of what we're calling for the Canadian Green Building Council as net zero carbon building. So that's our language that we're moving forward with on net zero. LEED has taken a back burner, so we're just focusing on net zero. Some of the LEED components we've learned in a net zero workshop are still relevant and they'll still be included as part of the net zero, but our language will be focused around net zero moving forward. Site plan control is underway. That went very well in terms of site locates, bringing the topography and locate drawings up to speed for the sub-consultants. We have a little bit further work to do subsequent to a meeting last week for a little bit more detail on the locate. And the Enbridge land has been developed quite nicely, where they were at 348 Elgin, and now they've decommissioned that entrance. We've given them right of way and some driveway permits, so now they're on Carter, 101 Carter. And then if I could move on to furniture, fixtures, and equipment. We are looking at that outside of the architectural and subconsultant contract. I've just itemized that here so that we can, each time we meet, talk about how that's developing. At this time, we have about 13 workstations that I took down, or that we took down from Old City Hall, that we can use temporarily. Whether that be at the tourism building or in one of the shell spaces here at the site as we renovate. And so that's in a nutshell where we're at. Excuse me. Is there any questions that you have based on this open?
There it is. Yeah. Couple of things I'd like to cover through you, Mr. Chair. First of all, it is a kind of complicated history how I got here, but I want to go back to the last time that certainly I would have been involved in discussion about this, and that would have been, I think, in June. It was June or July, when it came to council for approval whether or not to include the 3rd floor and the net zero concept. And my recollection is that the number we were given without those 2 elements was about 39 million.
39 million is the committed budget value, correct?
And how much did we add on at that point? There was an allowance for the 3rd floor. There was an allowance for net zero.
How
The
much
numbers at 3 million and 5 million roll around my head.
So through the chair to the mayor, we added a number of items that we're going to be discussing in the estimates committee still. It's not something that you've approved yet. So I recognize that. The Class C construction cost estimate came in at 48.8 mil, but then we've added on 3 mil for FF&E, 600,000 for permits, and the total project costs in addition are 17.75 mil more.
Oh yeah, I got that clearly from the report.
Right.
I want to know, what did we agree to understand in June or July? It wasn't 56 million.
No, it was
we did a memo, Christina, right about the cost of net zero and the cost of the third floor back to council. I think that's what the mayor's asking, what were those two matters, net zero and the third floor?
Net zero in the third floor. And no.
10
10,
in total.
that was, yeah, it was broken down 5.7 for third floor and 5 for net zero.
So when council last, the previous council last built it, it's the number, I can remember, it was under 50 million.
Yeah.
49 sounds about right. So now we're being told it's 9 million more than that.
Right, and that's because of some additional consulting fees. It's additional, we added in FF&E, that was 3 mil as well. And the first construction. Yeah,
Can I just want, yeah, can I answer that? So we 39 million was, as you look at, if you look at page 12, you can see the history of this project, the ups and downs. We were at 39 million, we was at 56 million last year at this time. We thought to get down to 39 million. We then, throughout the year, we realized there's no FF&E. That was the first thing discovery, which is $2 to $3 million. And then we came back to council with net zero and the third floor, which is another 10 million. So now you're up to almost 52 million. We went out with the 39 million was a class D estimate. It was never, it was very broad based per square foot estimate. We've now gone to a class C estimate through RPL, through a reputable cost consulting firm. And now we're looking at 56.7 million. If we hadn't done all the things we have done, keep it down, if you look at again this waterfall diagram, we'd probably be at 73 to 75 million. I think that's a lot of the narrative, but some things we've added and some things are just the cost of construction. We're going to see that in our overall capital budgets, and all kinds of other projects as well. But because the cost of capital is going up. So council would be conscious of is the FF&E at 3 million, the third floor, as well as the net zero, which is about just over 50 million dollars, 52 million.
So I get the impression, I may be wrong, but I get the impression that over the last 6 months, the focus has been on what we have to add into this building to comply with the general direction given by council, which was let's see what net zero looks like and this third floor. But anytime in the last 6 months, there's been any discussion about this is coming in a little bit higher than we anticipated. What can be eliminated from this project to bring the cost down to something more in line with what both council and the public expected?
the chair, we continue to look at a lot of impacts and how we can minimize through value engineering and through offsetting some of the, let's say, ownership of costs, whether they be FF&E. For example, we've worked with the police service to see how we can delineate what is the city's responsibility and what the police's responsibility is to put the building is. So do I have specific numbers that can tell you that we've reduced those costs? I think that we haven't asked for any additional, like we've seen some extra concerns that come in, and we look at the total for the contingency, for example. The consultants have given us a pretty weighty contingency, so we look to that often to make sure that we're not asking for funds in addition as, for example, roof conditions or some unknowns to the building and play as well.
Mr. Chair. So through the chair, if I can add to that, so I made a very conscious and deliberate decision that we eliminate the indoor firing range. That was made within the last 6 months. That was final. We're not going to have that discussion. It wasn't necessarily popular, but it did take a big chunk out. In my experience, those things become a perpetual maintenance challenge.
So I appreciate that, and I understand that the eliminating the firing ranges is what I was getting at. If you look at, are there pieces of this proposal that can be reduced or eliminated to keep better control over the overall cost. So I'll ask you this question. Have you included in this design for something for a lab?
We, through the chair, we have looked at the lab. Yes, we've increased the some of the requirements that move into the future for them. For example, how many hours you're operating, some of the cabinets, whether they're at the end of their life cycle or can be reused. We're always looking at value engineering those design portions to make sure that we're meeting the requirements in balance with the existing budget for it. Yeah.
So currently, what does the service do? Is it for the contract out the lab services or is it being done in this?
Through the chair, the bulk of it is in-house. Some may rely on the Center of Forensic Sciences, but I'll defer to the deputy for more of the discussion of the design.
So we currently do have a forensic laboratory, with a fully functional forensic unit. And so when we look at a new facility, we would enhance that as our forensic unit would continue to grow, because it is a core component of policing. And we have to ensure that we're meeting the adequacy standard when it comes to the forensic unit.
What does Barry do?
They have an in-house forensic laboratory that we toured and we took some advice on that.
Well, how do you make the decision going forward? What would ideally be done in house and what you would still contract out?
We don't contract out anything when it comes to forensics, and we really don't have the opportunity to contract anything out specifically. When we talk about Center of Forensic Sciences, there's certain things that we just can't process in-house, like every police service, including the OPP. So those things we take to the Center of Forensic Sciences. Anything else, we would do it in-house, and we have to be able to provide that service to the community. It is a core function of policing. We're not able to contract that specifically off to somebody else.
So my last question would be, is there anything else in terms of this design and what's contemplated similar to the shooting range that could be eliminated or reduced in scope and still not have a significant impact upon the service model?
I can answer that through the chair. We are looking at the building envelope as a main focus to ensuring we stay on budget. So whether that be some of the solar panels on the roof, do we need them on the entire roof or can we just place them on the new build? We had spec triple glazing windows. We know that we still need that level for net zero carbon, but there's other opportunities to value engineer the design, for example, 2-layered windows with a film in between. We're constantly, every time we go to a workshop or every time I send an email, I answer or look to seek answers, design solution in tandem with the budget from a building envelope perspective.
Yeah, through the chair, I just need to go back to the comment about contracting for forensics, because I don't want us accused of misleading or making a false statement down the road. So based on my experience in other provinces, there is the ability to contract forensics with private labs. In Ontario, that's typically not done. But to say it can't be done would be misleading. But I do know from experience, it is incredibly expensive and they can't do piecemeal. My experience with private labs is if you call them in for a homicide, they're doing the whole shebang from start to finish and in court as well. It's incredibly expensive. I just want to clear that up. So I don't want someone doing their own research and saying, chief, we found out that this problem we do contract. So to answer the question, can it be done? Conceptually and in other provinces, yes, but in the Ontario context, very rarely, in my experience, I've never seen it done. But I do know from previous experience, it's incredibly expensive. So I just want to clarify that, so we're not misleading.
Through the chair. I would just like to follow up on that. In the original 39 million, the forensics scope was included in that budget. So we've worked within that budget to ensure that we put out this forensic lab upgrade to include those costs. It's not an additional cost.
My very last question has to do with the nephew.
I don't believe you.
for this round, how about that? So the net zero concept, there are elements of it that, you know, you're designing the capacity, say, within the building, like to take solar panels, that sort of thing. A lot of those pieces of a net zero building are being, you know, every year there's, you know, an evolution in, say, solar panels, and generally with a view to making them better, more efficient and cheaper generally. Have you thought about that, whether there could be elements of net zero where you kind of built in the capacity for it in the building, but not necessarily going out and buying the piece, holding off until sometime later, hoping it becomes cheaper and better.
Through the chair to the mayor, yes, we're always looking at the net zero portion, again, related to the photovoltaic panels. We are not looking to just put the whole roof as solar and making sure that we're over generating this island approach to offsetting our electricity costs. I can also ask RPL to speak to that because every time we have a meeting about net zero, we make sure that we're, for example, electric cars. This is an example. We have a transformer that currently meets the needs of the building. If we want to add as many electric cars as we are interested in adding into the future, there'd be a separate transformer that's required. So what I do is when we are unsure if it fits into the existing budget, we put it on the issues log and we review those components in our meetings to make sure that we're fitting out the building to accept future growth for the police, but not necessarily automatically providing those finished products. If we need to make a transformer that allows additional expansion into the future, we'll just make it ready for the police, hand the building over to them under the budget, and they can grow into it.
Remember the bill.
Was the mayor done?
You said the last question, so.
Okay. So let's touch briefly on longevity through you, Mr. Chair, to Brian, to Christina. What is the planned longevity of this building now compared to, we blew it in 1990s, right?
Yeah, longevity is through the chair, bifold answer. You have the longevity of the building, which we've always established to be at 25 to 30 years. And we have that confirmed with our engineering sub-consultant as well. And then we have the fit out of the building in terms of occupancy. And I'd like to turn the floor over to Jason because he can best answer how he feels about that.
Yeah, so I think we definitely came to this project looking at the 25 to 30-year window. And would we be able to accommodate our police service in that window? And I think, again, the architects will probably be friends, we would definitely be able to meet that. Every section through the planning stage, we've looked at what is our current growth, and what is our projected growth based on how do we expect the city to grow and what areas do we expect the city to grow. So I'll give you an example of that would be our tech crimes area. Currently, right now, it's very small. And as the city grows, technology crimes are going to continue to grow as well. So we provided more space for them to continue to grow to meet that 30-year window. As far as operational aspects of it, we've looked at growth for every section, including down to our locker room. When the new locker room expands, where would we then create a second locker room and then unassigned space within the facility? So I think we're well within our target. And again, the architects might be able to provide a little bit more detail to it. But I think we're well within our target to look at that 25 to 30-year window, and then maybe even, you know.
So sort of a follow-up, Mr. Chair, to them. There was some discussion with the third floor being built for that planning, and I believe the mayor alluded to it in one of the two previous meetings, excuse me, that the third floor was not going to be used. So that would be for long planning. Could you elaborate on that one?
Okay, future. So in the initial plan, it was discussed having a third floor that would just stay empty for future growth. So as we started this project, we realized, which is a great concept, and that's where we wanted to go. But it then would only allow us to grow in that location. And if in the future we needed to grow in training or property or a locker room, they don't line up where the third floor is. So the architects came back with a concept where they've taken the square footage of what that third floor would be and have created unfinished, unassigned space throughout the building. So each of those sections in the future would have the capacity to grow as needed. So for example, IT, it has substantial growth in it, but it's also unassigned space next to it that would be left vacant. So as it undoubtedly will grow in the next 15 to 20 years, there is space for it to grow further, as opposed to just having it in one location.
Thank you. One more was the staff relocation. Could you give us an update on that? Please, and thank you.
Yeah, through the chair. Obviously, there's gonna be significant amounts of construction that occur within the building. And as a result, we have a tentative plan to move several administrative and investigative units down to the tourism building. Initially, we had talked about moving our comm center to the tourism building. And then when we talked about cost savings, we realized the amount of money that would cost to temporarily create a comm center to then just create it again in the new building. The architects came up with a phasing in plan where we would just build that once and not have to build it a second time. The units that we're going to move to the tourism building, it requires very little infrastructure for us to move them down there, essentially just internet access, which is why we've chosen to move those sections to that location.
571, the market disruption and lead times. Why is that in there? What are you anticipating there?
Through the chair to. Through the chair to Mark Withell. Market and labor disruptions. I'm leaving that, or we are leaving that in there to speak to every time we come to this meeting. It's a placeholder. At this time, we've built some cost into the budget to allow for items that are fluctuating in value. For example, we're always talking with the architect about open web steel joists and the lead times for those being a year. And so, and I can have the architect speak to that as well, but we're looking at different materials to sub out for those pieces. So not only is it materials that are challenged with lead time, but it's also labor disruptions in terms of how you're going to recruit a general contractor, how they're going to be able to respond to post-COVID construction environment. So this is not a detailed section at this time. I'd like to send it over to John and Lee that they can choose to see who wants to respond to that. Because I do ask at every meeting, what are we doing and how are we adding these things to the issue slot? But it's still a little early on to say because we haven't recruited a general contractor. One of the things we're going to do is do some pre-qualification of general contractors so that they can respond to the construction challenges through some addendums that I'm going to add into the pre-qualification documents to see how they can respond. But perhaps I see John's unmuted.
Yep. Thank you through the chair. Just to talk firstly about the pre-qualification, I think it's very important to use in the general contractor pre-qualification process to get their response and their recent past history on how they've dealt with both implementing a multi-phase construction project, but also how they've dealt with acquiring long lead time items such as generators and steel. To go back to the steel issue, we have, as a design team, recommended not to use open web steel joists because of the continuous or the continuing shortage of those items. And we have recommended a hybrid concrete hollow core and steel beam structure that actually allows us to make the building envelope and the building itself a little shorter. So we're saving some money on building envelope, even though we might be spending a few % more on the steel. But we're also, through that strategy, eliminating a number of potential risks in terms of construction delays. We're also looking at things like generators. So our specifications will include generator sizes and models that are more readily available than some of the others. So in this case, we're recommending 2 smaller generators as opposed to 1 single generator to try to conform with availability within the market for those units. So these are some examples of some of the things that we constantly discuss, both with Christine and Jason and with the design team as we go forward.
Thank you. Okay, so the last question there on page 8, we have the grid of the timeline there. So are we still looking at a start of 2023? And at the same time, we anticipate a lot of people bidding on this, or we think that we're somewhat limited because of the new construction that's coming up, if you know where I'm going with that? Is there gonna be a lot of interest in this? Is it gonna be really competitive bids, or is there gonna be 1 or 2?
I think what I said, Christine, I might want to get John to answer that. I mean, we have RPL here. There's 2 companies in North America that do this, and these guys are professionals. John, you want to give us an idea?
Yeah, through the chair. I think this is a big enough project to attract a lot of interest from some larger and mid-size contracting companies. I also think that there may be a turn down in some of the residential, particularly condominium construction across the province. So that could have a positive impact on the competitiveness for this project. But as against that, in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of government investment in infrastructure, which has fueled the construction industry. I think on balance, we're expecting a reasonably competitive environment. We've had a number of recent projects of similar size or a little bit larger than this go out within the last year, and we've been getting some fairly good quotes on that, fairly consistent in terms of the bid prices. We're not getting the indications that there's no interest by getting prices that are way above the mean. We seem to be getting some fairly respectable bids and some interest from contractors both in Ontario and across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair.
With the fit out of the 3rd floor instead of leaving it empty, did that increase the budget, or were there savings in other areas by not finishing other areas?
I can address that through the chair. One of the advantages to using the 3rd floor is that through the implementation process, portions of that can be used as swing space as opposed to spending dollars fitting out the tourism building. So there will be some savings in that area. But in general, we're keeping the same area of unfinished and unassigned space in the facility as we would have had if that had all been put on the 3rd floor. And the deputy put it very clearly what the advantages of having future growth capability in different parts of the building as opposed to just in one area.
And what about operating costs for operating the 3rd floor instead of sealing it off and not heating or air conditioning it?
It would have to be heated to a certain extent anyway. And we are constructing the new blocks or with high performance building envelopes. So our installation costs and our energy costs are going to be managed within that. It's not like we're pouring heat into a poorly insulated space. The space will be properly insulated, and the energy costs would not be excessive.
The mayor asked some questions about the solar, possibly delaying that to save some initial capital. What's the payback on solar these days?
Payback on solar is something like 20 to 25 years, based on a simple payback cost and payback period. But to achieve the net zero carbon, we only require to provide a certain percentage, I believe it's 5% of the building energy use through solar panels. Anything above that would be up to the discretion of the city of Brantford to invest further in that but the current budget does not include any more than what's necessary to meet the net carbon zero targets.
Okay, are there any grants for rooftop solar anymore, or?
No,
Right.
the FIT program, the feed-in tariff program that was in place a few years ago has been discontinued. There are some opportunities through the Canadian Federation of Municipalities for some green funding, low interest loans. So that's something that we are looking at with the project manager.
Okay, is it your intention to include any kind of batteries with the solar panels?
No, those are very expensive, and the payback period would be in excess of what would be reasonable for the city to accept.
Okay. Other questions?
Let's see, the only thing I'd like to bring up, Mr. Chair, wasn't in the summary, is our relationship with Enbridge next door. They've been a great valued partner. It's taken a while to do the land agreement, but the mayor has signed off on it 2 weeks ago as per council direction. It's Enbridge's hands and they should be sending it back. And so that land transaction and the entrance on Carter Street will all be done as well as part of the agreements. And that saved us a lot of dollars and created a good neighbor. They're very happy we're staying. And we're very happy to have them as our neighbor too. So I think that's also be noted, is that Enbridge was a really good community partner on this project for us.
Okay. One other question, with utilizing the third floor, how much does that reduce the need to move people around? Will we see savings in relocating people and how much?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the savings would take place in the future. As the deputy alluded to, having growth space available close to or adjacent to each of the functional units will make future growth much easier to manage and significantly less expensive in terms of interior, future interior fit ups.
I
So,
understand that. What I'm talking about is during construction, is there savings by not moving people 2 or 3 times?
yes, of course, yes, both in indirect savings and direct savings for construction and fit out.
Were you able to quantify that at all?
No, we did not do an item by item analysis of those costs, but the general consensus is that there would be significantly less moving, which results in less disruption. And the actual fit up, if we're using space that's going to be part of the building in the long term, it makes a lot more sense to fit up those spaces now than to fit up another building temporarily and then have that money not get any value for the city.
If you're the chair, just also why we chose the units that we did is because it takes minimal equipment to move them down there. A computer and a phone is all they're required to be in this space. When we first looked at moving forensics down there, the comm center, it was going to be significant investment to move them down there. Now it's very, very minimal.
And with that third floor, you can't just wait until it's finished and move people in there instead of the tourism center?
The units that we're looking to move there are located right where that construction will take place. So we also see the benefit of avoiding workplace claims for noise, vibration, and dust by moving the units that are going to be mostly impacted by that construction.
Okay.
We also have a phasing plan that shows, I can provide that to you, if you'd like to see the way in which units are being moved. It is much more seamless than the original. We didn't necessarily get to the point where we were confirming the phasing until we received the approval for the third floor in theory. So now that we've had that extra space, the phasing strategy is much more smooth and you're not moving people multiple times. So it does it does add value to the project.
Member Liddell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the chief and deputy. So when the construction begins, do you have any concerns about safety / security / compromise of evidence or any for people walking around? Have we got that all covered nicely?
But through the chair, so yeah, those are all items that are on the issues log. We will ensure that the security of the building is maintained at all times. As well as the individuals that will be doing the work on this building, and check the people that should be doing the work on this building. So it will be those.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Can somebody move the recommendation, the staff report 2022-681, Brantford Police Services Facility Redevelopment Project update be received. Moved by Member Liddell, second by Councilor Scully. Any further comments, questions? All in favor? Carried. That leaves us with the
And
minutes to approve. Moved by Member Liddell, seconded by Councilor Scully. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. We have no resolutions or notice of motions, so we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good meeting, guys. Not a good start to my Monday.
Did you go to City Hall?
Mary.